Welcome to another lecture video for external course Introduction to Government and Politics. Today we will be exploring Unit 8, which is titled Democracy. In this session, we will discuss the general concept of democracy, its challenges, and its application to Papua New Guinea. At the end of this discussion, we will try to achieve the following. Compare the direct democracy in ancient Athens to the modern representative and liberal democracy, explain the challenges in developing democracy in post-colonial states, and outline the distinctive features of Papua New Guinea's system of democracy. Now let's look at the Athenian models of democracy. We will be focusing on the elements of Athenian democracy, and there are four: People's Assembly, Executive Council, People's Court, and the Athenian citizenship. Now, central to Athenian democracy was the People's Assembly, which is the first element, where all citizens over the age of 20 could attend and participate. These meetings, held multiple times in a month, allowed citizens to speak, propose laws, and vote on important decisions. This direct involvement ensured that every citizen had a voice in the governance of the state. The administrative function, or the second element, which is the Executive Council, in Athens was managed by what is called the Baul, or Executive Council, a council of over 500 citizens aged over 30. Members were chosen by lot from the Assembly, or the People's Assembly, and served for a year. The Executive Council was responsible for the day-to-day administration, preparing Assembly agendas, and implementing decisions. This method of random selection aimed to prevent corruptions and ensure the rotation in power. The next element, which is the People's Court. The People's Court, or the judicial system, was another pillar of the Athenian democracy. The People's Court was made up of jurors selected randomly from a pool of volunteers. These jurors, numbering in hundreds for significant cases, had the authority to make legal decisions. Now, this ensured a broad representation of citizens in the legal process, maintaining public trust in the justice system. And finally, the last element, which is the Athenian citizenship. Athenian citizenship is restricted to those born to Athenian parents. Now, this excluding women, slaves, foreigners from the democratic process. While this ensured that only those with a stake in the city's future were making decisions, it also meant a significant portion of the population was disenfranchised, meaning they were not able to vote in important decisions of the city. Now, Athenian democracy emphasized direct participation and collective decision-making. Despite its limitations in inclusivity, it laid the groundwork for democratic ideals that continue to influence modern political thought. And by examining Athenian democracy, we gained insights into the challenges and the complexity of a true self-governance in a diverse society. Now, let's look at the representative and liberal democracy. Reasons for representative democracy. Firstly, consider the population size. In modern nation states, population can number in millions. Managing such numbers makes direct democracy impracticable. Representative democracy allows a small group or a smaller group of elected officials to make decisions on behalf of the larger population, ensuring that voices of the people are heard without overwhelming the governance process. Next, we have the intermittent interest. In the intermittent interest, citizens typically varying or different levels of interest and expertise in different political issues. So, representative democracy allows people to elect officials who can dedicate their time, energy, and expertise to governance, ensuring the decisions are made by those who are consistently involved and informed. And that's one of the reasons why we vote for our parliamentarians or the MPs, so that they can go in and represent us instead of us having to spend our time considering or standing in parliament, so they can go and represent our interests on the floor of parliament. Now, modern governance, the next issue is complexity and numerous issues. Now, modern governance involves a vast array of issues, from economic policies to healthcare. The complexity and sheer number of these issues makes it unrealistic for every citizen to be fully informed and actively involved in every decision. That is why elected representatives are tasked with understanding this complexity and making informed decisions on behalf of their constituencies. Lastly, efficiency in decision making. Efficiency in decision making is another critical factor. Direct democracy can be time-consuming and inefficient. Representative democracy streamlines the process by delegating authority to elected officials who can act more quickly and decisively, addressing urgent issues and maintaining a functional government. Lastly, accountability and specialization are essential. Representatives are accountable to their constituents and can be voted out of the office if they fail to represent their interest effectively. This accountability encourages representatives to act in the public best interest. Additionally, representatives often specialize in certain policy areas, allowing them to develop expertise that benefits the decision-making process. Now, representative democracy here, comparing to the Athenian model, offers a practical solution for managing governance of a large, diverse populations. By electing representatives, citizens can ensure that their interests are represented while allowing for efficient and knowledgeable governance. This system balances public participation with the practicalities of modern statecraft, making it a cornerstone for democratic societies. Now let's look at the challenges. In third world countries, the problem of democracy is in its nation building. Now, the various problems include establishing control over its citizens, the governance is ineffective or inefficient, the issue of rise of indigenous ruling class, the fragile state institutions, and the appeal of authoritarian system. Now we will go through each and one of them by looking at some examples here. Now, establishing control over its citizens. Let's look at the example of China's social credit system. So China's social credit system will demonstrate this idea of the challenge of nation building. So China's social credit system, this system assigns citizens a social credit score based on their behavior. So by monitoring online activities, financial transactions, and other social interaction, the government determines each citizen's trustworthiness and social status. Those who with low score may face travel restrictions, limited access to services, and other penalties. This exemplifies how modern technology can be used to establish control over citizens. Now, secondly, let's look at the governance inefficiency, another issue or challenge of nation building. We turn to Venezuela, where the government inefficiency has led to a severe economic crisis. Despite having abundant oil reserve, mismanagement, corruption, and policy decision-making have resulted in inflation, shortage of basic goods, and a decline in living standards. So this crisis has plunged many Venezuelans into poverty and sparked significant social unrest, highlighting the devastating impact of an ineffective governance. Thirdly, the rise of indigenous ruling class. Let's look at the case for Zimbabwe's land reform. Zimbabwe's land reform. After independence, President Mugabe launched a program to redistribute land from white farmers to indigenous Zimbabweans. However, corruption and inefficiency plagued this process, leading to the rise of new ruling elite made up of Mugabe's loyalists. Those individuals benefited from land seizures. This demonstrates how land reform efforts can be subverted to consolidate power among select few. Now, the other issue here is the fragile state's institutions, and we talk about Somalia's challenge or governance challenge. Somalia provides a stark example of a fragile state institution. Decades of conflict, clan-based politics, and weak governance have left the country without effective state institutions. This vacuum of power has allowed non-state actors, including militant groups, to exert control over various regions. Somalia's challenge highlights the importance of a strong governance structure in maintaining national stability. And the last is the appeal of authoritarian system. Now let's look at Russia's examples. So Russia under President Vladimir Putin, despite having democratic institutions, in theory, Putin's regime has consolidated power through suppression of political dissent, media control, and electoral manipulation. This approach appeals to some segments of the population who value stability and national pride over democratic values. So Putin's regime illustrates how authoritarian systems can maintain support by prioritizing security and nationalist sentiments. So in conclusion, these case studies from China, or the discussion from China, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Somalia, and Russia offers insights into various governance challenges and their impacts on society and the idea of representative democracy. By examining these examples, we gain deeper understanding of the complexities of governance and diverse strategy employed by states worldwide, or the challenge of representative democracy. But true to its, in the next section, democracy in developing countries, the factors of transition. There are about 4 factors here. In the previous discussion, we've talked about the challenge of nation building and how it can affect state institutions, more or less affect the system of government. Here we look at democracy in developing countries, and number 1, we look at the 4 important ideas or themes that surrounds democracy in developing countries. Number 1 is the democratic political culture that any developing countries must have, or any developing countries must practice. Number 2, we look at the issue of colonial legacy and its impact on the state development. Number 3, the strong civil society, the importance of civil society, and lastly, the autonomy amongst political leaders. Now, these are various factors that influence democratic transition and stability. Let's start with the United States, which has a long-standing tradition of democracy dating back to its founding fathers. Key principles such as individual rights, freedom of speech, and regular elections are deeply ingrained in an American society. So this strong democratic political culture facilitated smooth transition of power between different administrations, ensuring the stability of a democratic system. This is not so much the same in developing countries, and Papua New Guinea is one of them. So Papua New Guinea, we are struggling, or we are yet to embrace and inculcate the values of democracy into our society. But important here is to build a democratic political culture. An example, the United States tend to be an example of extending and building this democratic political culture. Now, secondly is the colonial legacy and how it is important. Now, the impact of colonial legacy on democratic transition. Many countries in Africa and Asia inherited their political structure from former colonial rulers. For example, India, Nigeria, and Kenya adopted parliamentary systems of government from the British. This colonial legacy has shaped their democratic transition, requiring this nation to adopt inherited political institutions to suit their unique context. Now, Papua New Guinea has inherited the colonial legacy from Australia. That is why we have a system of government that we have today. The Westminster system is an example of transitioning, from the British rule. Now, thirdly, a strong civic society plays a crucial role in democratic transition. A prime example is the solidarity movement in Poland during the late 20th century, led by Lech Walesa. Solidarity was a trade union and social movement advocating for political reforms and human rights. Through widespread support and grassroots activism, Solidarity pressured the authoritarian government, ultimately leading to free elections and establishment of democracy in Poland. So this gets us to the idea of having a strong civil society. Lastly, the autonomy among political elites. The importance of autonomy among political elites. For example, in South Africa, the transition to democracy was facilitated by willingness of political elites from both the apartheid regime and the African National Congress to engage in a dialogue and compromise. Leaders like Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk showed a commitment to peaceful negotiation, which helped prevent a violent transition and laid the foundation for a democratic South Africa. So why this is important? Democratic political culture, colonial legacy, strong civil society, and autonomy amongst political leaders or elites are key influencing democratic transition and stability. By examining examples from the United States, Africa, Asia, Poland, and South Africa, we try to gain insights and understanding of the issues of establishing and maintaining democracy. Now, let's look at the Papua New Guinea. In the next section, in Papua New Guinea's case, Papua New Guinea as a unique political landscape of Papua New Guinea as a unique landscape. A nation home to 800 different tribes and languages, this highly tribal divided society places a significant emphasis on perception of leaders who are just representatives of their electorates, but also tribal leaders embodying the big man system. In Papua New Guinea, leaders are more than just elected officials. They are seen as big men representing their villages, societies, and electorates. This system highlights that leaders are both tribal leaders and national representatives, blending traditional authority with modern governance. Leaders in Papua New Guinea are expected to distribute state resources. Members of Parliament deliver development through their district development funds or the provincial service improvement grants. Their re-election often hinges on their ability to bring development to their districts. The second aspect of it is that the perception of leaders as resource distributors has led an opportunistic national politics. Leaders often align with executive government to access state resources, resulting in frequent motions of no confidence in Parliament. Different factions and MPs constantly vie for their share of their resources, and that is the reason why we have this continuous vote of no confidence in our history, because of different factions, different groups vying for the access to the state resources. And finally, Papua New Guinea system, and the challenge is that voters are bound by tribal, family, and social obligations. Voting in Papua New Guinea is heavily influenced by tribal, family, and social obligation. For example, the Australian National University's Domestic Observation Report on election noted that voters prioritize leaders who can bring in development to their electorates above all else. This sort of underscores the importance of leaders' ability to command development in securing votes. So you may say the political dynamics in Papua New Guinea are shaped by the big man system, the distribution of state resources, opportunistic politics, and tribal influence on voting. Understanding these factors provides us some form of understanding into how electoral process in Papua New Guinea is established. Thank you for watching. If you find this video informative, please like and subscribe for more political insights from Papua New Guinea and the Pacific.